So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julia Coakley, Director of Operations, and on behalf of the MGAA, I'd like to welcome you to our briefing this afternoon, which is being delivered by Innovation Group. Before handing over to our presenters, I'd just like to run through a few housekeeping points. Please ensure your microphone and your camera is off. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will be answered during the Q&A session and will remain anonymous. However, if we don't have time to answer these questions, they will be addressed post-event should you provide your contact details. This presentation is accredited for CPD points if relevant to your ongoing professional development programme, and the recording will be available on our website and our MGAA YouTube channel. You will be sent a feedback survey post-event, so please do take time to complete this survey, which will take no more than 2 minutes, but will provide valuable information on your thoughts on both this webinar and our general programme of events. So today's briefing, entitled Subsidence Focus, Managing High Claims Volume and the Customer Journey Throughout Surge. Innovation Group's Stephen Vertefeuille hosts an interactive roundtable session on subsidence, the pressures faced within the industry during the current surge, and how Innovation Group managed the customer journey throughout this alongside his colleagues Richard Rollit, Liz Jones and Lisa Davison. So Stephen, if I might hand over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you ever so much for that. Really appreciate it, and appreciate everyone that's joined us today. So we'll do a quick intro of myself and my colleagues, esteemed star panelists that we have here today. So a great selection of people with us. I'm then going to do a very brief intro of Subsidence for those people that either once the recording is posted on YouTube or wherever, all people that have joined us today might know much about Subsidence, and then we'll crack on with the questions and answers. So my name is Stephen Vertefeuille, and well done with the pronunciation there, Julia. 10 out of 10 for you there. I at times might stumble across that and not be able to pronounce it myself, so well done for you. I've worked in the insurance industry for now a fair bit, but just over 10 years, majority of it in claims. 5-ish years in motor claims as a claims handler and senior claims negotiator, and then joined Innovation Group in 2017. Joined as a claims handler first, subsequently moved to claims manager, managing one of the teams, and lately I've taken on the role as a key account manager, looking after a number of Innovation Group's property clients. Thoroughly enjoying the experience, and obviously this recent spell of surge has put us in a bit of a demanding spot, but we are enjoying it. We're tackling it head on, and pleased to say that we're actually doing quite well. So that's me in a nutshell. I'll pass on to Liz Jones, if possible, please. Liz, you first.
Hi, I'm Liz Jones. I come from a customer service background. I moved into the insurance sector in 2007. I've undertaken several roles within Innovation Group. So I've been with the company for 12 years. I've been lucky enough to have quite a wide opportunity to gain experience around the customer service areas within Innovation Group, some operations management, and also around customer relations, client audit and compliance. And over the coming months, I'm aiming to focus on providing learning and feedback back into the operations, which is linked into our audit function, our customer relations, and that will be for both positive and negative feedback, and the concentration on continuous improvement for the customer journey programme.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Liz. Richard, would you mind introducing yourself, please, sir?
Yeah, I'm Richard Rollit. I'm Technical Director at Innovation Group. I've been here about 10 years. I've been doing subsidence claims longer than I care to remember. I still find it really fascinating, kind of interested in how we approach subsidence, how we deal with issues about trees, and how we find different ways of working, looking at AI and risk modelling and that type of thing. So still a fascinating subject.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Richard. And last but definitely not least, Lisa, please.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, so I'm Lisa Davison, Head of Claims Services. I've been around Subsidence now for 22 plus years. I predominantly worked for a company called Marischal Thompson, who provided site investigation and mitigation services to insurers before Marischal Thompson was acquired by the Innovation Group in 2012. I started my life in that arena as administrator, and over the years I've just managed to kind of work myself up to where I am now. I've got a level of technical expertise in Subsidence just from the amount of years that I've been working within there. And obviously my role is to make sure that we handle the claims in an effective way, looking after our customers, whether that be the policyholders or our insurer clients.
Fantastic. So there we go. That's a little bit of all of us, but now a little bit of the star subject, which I suppose is subsidence. So in brief, and again for people that may or may not know, subsidence is the downward movement of the property, usually caused by drainage or vegetation. And obviously we've had quite a warm, dry, hot summer, which has been pleasant and great. Don't get me wrong, not complaining there. However, that can unfortunately at times cause some slight issues. And in the insurance market, more specifically with subsidence, the drying of the subterranean can therefore unfortunately cause subsidence. We have the majority of our claims, which is roughly 60%, is caused by tree roots and vegetation, 30% by leakage of drains, and the rest, roughly 10%, sinkhole, landslip, and heave. So the majority of claims can be due to vegetation and tree. More specifically, the roots that are trying to gain as much moisture as possible. They therefore subtract moisture from the soil, and if the roots happen to be under a property, they will therefore take the compactness of the ground and the moisture away from there, and therefore the property will start moving downwards. And we do try to mitigate as best as possible. There is the lovely underpinning section of claims that we do, obviously, but we try to avoid that, not only because it is expensive, but also it is quite damaging to the environment due to the carbon use of the materials and whatnot. So it's definitely something that we try to avoid if possible, and we do try to mitigate by repairing drains and or dealing with the vegetation itself. So that is a very brief intro to subs as well, but we will crack on with the questions now. The first one that we have is, we are in a surge. We still currently are most definitely in a surge. And what are the key issues facing the market as we try to manage volume claims? So Lisa, if I could come to you first, what would you say the key issues that the market is facing regarding the volume of claims?
Okay, so I think there's a few issues, Stephen, if I'm honest. I think obviously following the COVID situation as well, before we kind of move on to the difficulties that we face in surge, I think it's just important to outline that the labour market has changed massively since the start of COVID. I think there's been a big shift in people's kind of attitude towards employment, and with a lot of younger people choosing more of a work-life balance, perhaps, than what they did previously, over the typical sort of 40-hour-a-week job as it was previously. Yes. And I also think that working from home has had an impact, not just in our industry, but I think across the piece. I think there's it really suits some people and it really doesn't suit some other people. And I don't think we've seen the full effect of that yet. But shifting onto the claims and what the key difficulties that we're facing are, obviously we are in surge, so we have had a massive increase in instructions. And I think when we're talking subsidence claims and we're talking, trees in particular, and the fact that we are trying to secure tree removal in order to mitigate the cause of subsidence. I think getting trees removed, regardless of whether we're in surge or not, I think is a really challenging subject, especially when sort of dealing with local authorities and commercial parties. I think it not only takes time to gather that information and the evidence that you need to confirm the normal cyclical movement that we're looking for in a tree-related subsidence claim. But these negotiations as well, the lengthy negotiations they can be, and it's not a particularly good customer journey at the best of times.
Yeah.
So adding kind of surge into the mix with an increase in volumes, I think that's really challenging as well in order to be able to manage those customer expectations. I think as well, you know, tree removal is a delicate subject when we're talking sort of third-party trees. You know, nobody really particularly wants to take trees down and the impact that it has on the environment. But I think, again, it's important to think about the reasons why and the fact that these trees do damage properties and to quite some extent on some of them, if I'm honest. So I think perhaps the whole difficulty around securing tree removal, certainly with local authorities, commercial third parties, I think is just exacerbated by the fact that we've got increased claim volumes and trying to keep our customers happy and really be transparent with the expectation. Like I said earlier, it's really frustrating for customers when they're dealing with a subsidence claim anyway. So, you know, add any kind of, you know, slight delays in that we're going to experience because of increased claim volumes, and it's just going to, you know, exacerbate that more. But we're really clear with our expectation setting with customers. And I think the majority of them kind of understand we've had a really, really dry summer. And as a result of that, obviously, it affects the soil volumes and the desiccation of that soil, which in turn causes property movement. So I think it's just, I think it's a difficult one anyway, removing trees, but I think surge on top,
Doesn't help.
It's really challenging, Stephen, yeah.
No, some very, very fair points there. Richard, would you mind me also asking you, what do you feel or think the key issues facing the market are with these current volumes and how to manage them and whatnot, please?
Yeah. I just thought it would be useful to give people an idea of the volumes that we're getting. So
Please do.
From August, sort of beginning of August, after the heat waves we had in July, we've seen a five-fold increase in claim volumes, and that's been pretty much sustained and is continuing now. And we don't really expect it to drop off until probably mid to end of November. What that means in practice is that in that 4-month period, we'll probably get the same volume of work that we got during the whole of 2021. So if you imagine we get a whole year's worth of work in a 4-month period, just to give you some idea of the kind of impact that has. So that has huge impacts, both for our insurer clients in terms of cost, but also in terms of physically, how do we manage with such a big increase? And that's the real challenge when you come into surge. So you get that huge volume increase. And then, as Lisa says, the world is getting more difficult with things like Brexit, with people wanting a better work-life balance. It's not a good time to say to them, work 5 times harder than you normally do to keep up with the increased volume. But some of the other things that we're seeing in comparison to other years where we've had surge events is that inflation is a huge problem now. So that kind of inflationary pressure, not only in terms of material supplies, but also in terms of cost for clients, and also the impact that war in Ukraine, Brexit, COVID have all had on supply chains. So difficulties with the supply chain, difficulty with increasing cost, and just a huge challenge with the increased volume.
Definitely, no, absolutely. Some very, very good points there. We mentioned COVID as well, which I think that ties us quite well onto the next question. How different is it managing customers in this surge versus the previous one of 2018 with a change in behaviours post-COVID? Liz, would you mind if I come to you on that one, please?
No problem at all. Thank you, Stephen. So customer expectations and tolerance levels have changed considerably over the last couple of years. Some of this is as a result of the practices that we've had to adopt through the pandemic. It's resulted in increased technical driven culture, and we need to have information at our fingertips. Throughout the lockdowns, we had quite a lot of people who were in their homes. So we had a lot of people who weren't able to go to work. This drove a huge increase in home interior improvements, even exterior DIY projects, home improvements right the way through. So some of which resulted in customers uncovering potential issues and having to let them place their projects on hold because they were unable to have tradesmen in the properties, unless of course it was deemed to be essential works. So parties who had already started repairs, again, they had to put them on hold as well due to government restrictions. And some even chose through personal choice as a result of not wanting to come into contact with the virus. So as effect of the lockdowns easing, we saw a huge wave of sectors opening back up. And we were actually enabling tradesmen to enter customers' homes again. However, some customers were nervous around this and therefore chose to still keep their claims on hold, whereas some customers actually turned around and said, we actually want it done, and how quick can you get it done? So it was very much a balancing act of trying to get these claims through the process and reopen the works back up again. Unfortunately, some of our suppliers, and right the way across the market, had to place parties on furlough and therefore needed to bring them back into the workforce. So we had periods of time where there were delays in works starting again because they were starting to open back up. We also had a period of time where we had to use enhanced PPE and cleaning measures on entry and exit of everybody's properties. There was still social distancing in place. And we also experienced some shortages in materials and some delays in the products being delivered to sites. So all of this, when you add it all together, it extended your lead times for your customers. Another key aspect that was really important throughout COVID was actually to identify vulnerable customers. What we've actually done throughout the pandemic is we've made sure that we were able to not only identify the customer, but manage their specific needs, providing them with the support in order to give them what they needed through the claim. We've also recognised that it's not just through the pandemic that this was important, it was actually for all claims. So we've provided training to all frontline staff to ensure that they've all got the skills to be able to identify vulnerabilities initially. Through the conversations that they have with the customers, they're gaining the explicit consent to be able to record that information and pass it on to other handling parties within the customer journey so that we can meet the customer requirements. We may start to see increased vulnerabilities over the coming months due to the cost of living and also fuel and energy crisis increasing. So we are going to need to look for additional solutions to support customers and adapt to the needs of the market. This isn't only limited to new claims coming through the process. The vulnerabilities can be identified throughout any point within a claims journey. So therefore, it's important for our frontline staff to be adequately trained and be able to easily identify at any point in the claim where someone's circumstances have changed and they do need that additional support. Now, with the effect of COVID and taking the customer's vulnerability, not taking customers' vulnerabilities into account, of course, this will drive frustration, and it will actually reduce tolerance levels further for the customer. Therefore, it could increase complaints if communications are not effective to keep the customers updated at each phase. With the increase in the volume that's coming through, this increases the challenge even further. So effective communication strategy needs to be maintained throughout, and it can't be a rigid communication strategy. It needs to be flexible in order to flex to the demand of what's coming in. As a result, what we've actually done is we've actually looked at how can we communicate with our customers, not just gone to the old method of written communication. So we've looked at text, we've looked at how we can provide information via email, telephone, everything that we can possibly do, we are doing currently. We've also developed a number of key documents. So we've developed keeping in touch documents, which give the customer a guideline on this is the parties who will be involved in your claim. This is when you can expect at the key points in your claim that these parties will be in touch with you. These are supported right at the very beginning of the claim with a frequently asked questions document and also a glossary of terms that it's a jargon busting document. So basically we're explaining to the customer, you may hear this through the actual claim. This is what it means.
Mm-hmm.
We've tried to support the customer wherever we can in that. What we've also done is we are looking at our customer feedback. We find that very valuable. We don't just look at customer feedback and take the goods. We're taking everything that is bad from our customer feedback and the good. We take the bad into the operation. We look at what can we learn from it? What do we need to do differently? And with the goods, this is what good looks like. And we feed that back in order for everybody to see, this is what a good claim journey would look like. Let's learn from this. So we are enhancing that over the coming months. In addition to all of that, we're also enhancing our customer communication strategy as well. And we are now starting to look towards more technical driven solutions for the future.
Fantastic. No, that's thank you so much for that. Really, really appreciate it. We've obviously mentioned the policyholder, the customer from COVID and the surge, but Lisa, as an operations manager, if you don't mind me checking in with you, how have your teams found it, interactions with the customers? Have they noticed any change with this current surge, and also post-COVID, any different interactions or different ways that the customer might want to interact with us?
I think the big change, certainly post-COVID, is that I think prior to COVID, as I touched on earlier, life was as it was. It was the normal for everybody. Yes. Since when COVID hit, obviously people were spending more times in their home than what they'd ever done before, whether that was because they were furloughed or they were working from home. So from a customer perspective, they were living and working in amongst the damage in their property, whereas previously, they had that escape out to work and perhaps it wasn't at the forefront in the mind. So what we did find is that customers were becoming a lot more, I don't want to use the word demanding, but they became a lot more
focused,
proactive is the word, in that they are now more likely than ever to chase progress, chase progress. And, as I touched earlier, I think we do our very best, and we've put an awful lot of measures in place to set expectations on claim durations with customers. We've got some keeping in touch documents. We've just recently done an introduction video that kind of takes them through the life cycle of a subsidence claim. So we've done a lot of work around setting those expectations. But I just think that the whole post-COVID mindset is still there. I think the COVID shift changed people's mindsets probably far more than what we ever gave it credit for. So the demands of the customer are more. They are more probably aware of what's going on around them in their homes, taking notice more. So from an operational point of view, we saw and have seen an increase in calls into the business and emails from customers of wanting updates, even after expectations have been set as to timescales. And I think, the one downside of subsidence claims is that, aside from the fact that they're lengthy and that they are really quite not a particularly good customer journey because of duration, but because we've got to go through that mitigation phase and we've got to liaise with tree owners, local authorities, etc., we are relying on parties out with our control. So that in itself can be really frustrating for the customer. So I think from an operational point of view, we have definitely seen a more proactive approach from customers than what we did pre-COVID, without a doubt.
Makes sense. And I don't know about any of you or people that are listening, but I work from home in the spare room, and I just need to look up while it's on a call and I see a few cracks, and so it might actually prompt me to call in. Now I'm lucky enough that working in the subsidence remit, I know that, okay, I'm quite certain that is not subsidence, but for someone that maybe doesn't work in the insurance industry, they have more time to being at home to actually think, oh, that's new, let me call my insurance company. No, that's some fair points there. Thank you, Lisa and Liz, indeed. Next question is, how do you think this surge will impact long-term when its impact will be reduced, particularly any expectation when we'll be going back to business as usual, if that's even possible? Richard, would you mind if I come to you on this one, please?
Yeah, by all means. In terms of BAU, it's always difficult with subsidence surges because they're not like a storm surge where you have an event and you pretty much get over that quite quickly. With subsidence, we tend to think of it as the pig in the python analogy. So yes. You have a huge glut in claims, a whole year's worth of work comes in a very short period of time, and then you gradually work through that claim. So if you imagine it starts as a bit of a tsunami and then gradually works its way through the system to eventually become less of a tsunami and more of a wave or a ripple when you get to the very end of the claims. So the big issues that we start off with are around just getting visits sorted out when the claims come through. And then as you go through the stages, so the impact is felt through those different parts. And so the next kind of bottleneck will be site investigations and digging holes to confirm the cause. And then as we go through site investigations, it goes into Lisa's world again for mitigation, trying to remove trees, that type of thing. And then eventually we'll get to the repair phase. But as you go through each of those, so the impact becomes less, that kind of huge spike becomes more elongated and flattens. So the impact becomes slightly less. But it's quite difficult as you kind of talk to insurers about looking at agreeing service standards for those kind of surge claims, because the initial contact is quite easy, but as you move through the different factors, it gets more difficult. The other aspect that you'll see during a surge is that claims where you couldn't get trees out, where, for example, they were pruned, or given a haircut or whatever, those claims will often come back, they will often recur. So not only do you get a kind of uplift in claims that are new, but you get an uplift in claims that are recurring or further damage is happening to properties. So it does affect it in those kind of ways. I think in terms of when we will get back to BAU, it generally starts to get back to kind of more normal feeling towards the end of spring, the beginning of summer next year. So if we're busy again next year, it's a kind of double whammy. But yes, if we have a quiet summer, then generally we start to catch up and get back to an even footing. But it's a challenging time, not just now, but for quite a long period to go as well, unfortunately.
Well, fingers crossed here's to being able to get back to business as usual. But I suppose your answer, the latter part of it, of next year, next summer, will it happen again? I suppose that ties us also in with the next question, which is, do you think periods like this are becoming the norm? Will we see more frequent surge years, be that a smaller one or a larger one like this one? I seem to believe, Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, the 2018 one wasn't as drastic as this one. But, you know, will we see any periods more like this, of more hotter summers? Lisa, I could actually come to you first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem at all. Well, that's the $1 million question, isn't it?
I know.
You know, I think when we take into consideration global warming, what's happening with the weather, what's happening, you know, with the summers and the winters. But I think, you know, I think the one thing we can be sure of, excuse me, is the drier the weather, the drier the soils.
Yes.
So from a vegetation point of view, obviously vegetation needs moisture to survive. So they will continue to take the moisture from the shrinkable clay soils, causing the ground underneath to move, which causes the cracking in the property. So will they become more regular? I think it depends on the whole global warming situation and how quickly that moves. You know, yeah, trees are trees. Trees need to survive. Trees need water uptake in order to survive. So the drier the soil, the more likely we are to see subsidence.
Absolutely, and obviously dry the summers as well.
Exactly.
That is one to take into consideration. Richard, from your point of view, obviously from maybe a more technical point of view, or from what you're reading and seeing out there, what are your thoughts? Do you think that this is becoming more the norm? Will we see more frequent surge years, be that smaller, larger, or the same as this one? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it will become more normal. So
don't say that.
If you look back, subsidence cover started in 71, and we used to get quite regular surge events every 6 years or so. So we got one in 76, and then 80s, 90s, 2003, and then the last one in that kind of phase was 2006. So they were happening quite regularly, and you kind of got used to that cycle that you get a surge, the background claim numbers would increase, and you'd get into a regular cycle. And then from 2006 until 2018, which was the last surge, there was a kind of 12-year period where the summers were quite flat. We didn't get a huge increase in volume. So 2018 was perhaps a bigger shock than this surge has been. And it was really quite difficult to understand why we got that kind of period of relatively benign weather, particularly because the kind of climate change theories are hotter, drier summers, warmer, wetter winters. But one of the thoughts was that because the temperature is warming, the atmosphere can hold more water, so that you do get those kind of heavy downfalls in summer, and that was potentially enough to take the edge off things, so that during that period you weren't seeing surge events. I probably think that period was kind of fooling us. It was making us think that this isn't an issue and subsidence isn't going to be an issue going forward. I'm beginning to think differently now. I'm beginning to think that we were quite lucky to get that quiet period, that when you look at the Met Office forecasts and the idea that heat waves like the one we saw in July, which triggered this surge, could happen every couple of years, you kind of think the frequency of surges is probably going to increase. It's probably going to become a more regular occurrence. Yeah, I'm in terms of the doom mongering, I'm probably moving from subsidence is going to become more of an issue going forward than less of an issue, unfortunately. Yeah, I think we've got some challenges, particularly if we don't control global temperatures, and if we do get the kind of predictions of really hot, dry drought periods, because that's what really triggers the issues that we get with subsidence and surge. As Lisa was saying, the trees just getting stressed and looking further and further to find water, and getting more involved in damaging buildings.
Definitely. So I guess what we're unfortunately saying there is that whilst people might not know a lot about subsidence, they unfortunately will be doing so in the years to come. Hopefully that won't be the case, but suppose that's what seems to be on the table. Thank you, obviously, for all of your answers. Those are the questions that we have for now. Julia, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm now to pass this back on to you, if I remember correctly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.
Very interesting. So thank you for that. I've just put a nudge for our delegates to ask any questions they might have in the chat box. But I have a question for you, which is what, in your view, and you'll have to guide me on who's best to answer this one, what, in your view, is the market approach to funding tree removal, mitigation, especially third-party vegetation, and does this approach trend to change, and does this approach, I think it means tend to change during surge?
Potentially one for Richard or maybe Lisa's area in mitigation. Would either of you want to potentially pick this one up? Sorry.
Yeah, no, most insurers pay for policyholder customers' trees to be removed. When it comes to neighbours' trees, the majority of insurers don't pay for neighbours' trees to be removed. There is some that are beginning to change and beginning to move in that direction, but by and large, if it's a neighbour's tree or if it's a third-party tree, then insurers don't fund the tree removal. And the reasoning for that is kind of linked to the legal nuisance. So essentially, if you allow a tree to grow and it causes damage, you have a legal liability, and so insurers expect that third party, whether it's a neighbour or a local authority or a commercial business, to stop causing that nuisance and that damage. As I say, that's beginning to change as insurers become more enlightened and realise that actually it's in their interest to get trees removed. So I think that will be something that will change and will develop as we go forward. And certainly surge events tend to help to get a spotlight onto subsidence and highlight some of those difficulties. So sometimes surges are good, that they improve how we do things, and I think that might be one area where insurers will be persuaded to actually, by funding it, they can free up or prevent expensive remedial work, and also kind of improve that customer journey, because there's less friction about getting trees removed with neighbours if insurers are going to fund that. So very good question, and I think that it will change, it will improve.
I think just to add to that, if I may, Richard, obviously as well with the current climate and the the impact on everybody with rising energy costs, etc., it is becoming more difficult for third parties to fund their own tree removal. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, whilst there is no average sort of tree removal cost, dependent on the size of the tree, we could be talking in excess of £1,000. There's a lot of people now in the current climate that can't just lay their hands on that type of money. So we are seeing, as Richard just said there, we are seeing more insurers hopefully come forward and agree to fund third-party works to keep things moving, because otherwise it would just be a very protracted journey for the customer.
Thank you for that. Thanks, both of you, Richard and Lisa, for answering that one. Another question, I actually think this is still with you, Lisa, potentially. You've spoken about how your teams and handlers had to adapt in this current surge, but how has it affected them?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I think for those of us that have been around in the industry for many years, this is not our first surge. I've worked plenty of surges before. However, for a lot of our handlers, they've never seen anything like this before. It's definitely been a baptism of fire, if I'm honest. And, they've never seen claim volumes at the levels that they're at the moment. Obviously, their priorities are changing on an hourly basis because, we've got so much kind of work to keep moving. So I think they've struggled with that a little bit, if I'm honest. I think they're over the initial shock now, but each day brings its own challenges still. We're making sure that, you know, we're looking after them. We put in daily huddles with them, like well-being checks to make sure that they're okay. We've got overtime available to deal with the work volumes, but in the same breath, we're making sure these guys don't burn themselves out, and that they don't feel under any pressure to do it. The work's still going to be there, isn't it? Whether they do it or they don't. I think as well, we provide all kinds of support. We're there, we listen, our doors are always open. We've also brought in some short-term staff, some temps to help to ease the load so that they can focus on the stuff that they are skilled at, and moving those claims forward. You know, we've just done an exercise across Innovation Group where we've sent all of our staff a nice little wellbeing box, and a nice thank you for working under these pressures of surge. And it was a nice touch. It was very, very well accepted, and it was just a little bit of pampering for them. Like, I think the ladies got one type of a box, the men got the other, but it had some like face packs in, not for the men, Richard or Stephen, but I think they got.
Oh, we're all for equality,
Yeah.
I got the bath salts. I won't be using them.
I think they got bath salts.
Yes.
So it's just, that's one of the things that I've been really kind of high focus on, is just making sure that our staff they're comfortable, they're not too overwhelmed. We're just talking to them all of the time, and we're just, trying to just guide them on, just deal with this. Don't worry about what's going on over here. That's our job. We'll kind of, steer you in the right direction. So they are taking a lot of managing, if I'm honest, but then it's understandable in the circumstances.
I think ultimately, in terms of whether it's something like this, a CAT event, you're thinking about the end consumer as well, and to make sure that you're fully compliant and you're ensuring that your service levels don't shift. And that's the same whether it's a business using a TPA or in-house, or indeed directly to the insurance company. The important thing is the end goal is that the consumer feels no different to their level of service that they're receiving. So I think it clearly is, and you're demonstrating really well, it's imperative to look after the staff when they're under particular pressures, and need to maintain the service levels across the board. So thank you for that, Lisa. So I've got another one here. A bit of an apology, it might be a simple question, but I would say not at all. Is there a risk to tree population if trees are being removed as a result of subsidence, and in turn potentially contributing to the worsening of climate change? I think that's an excellent question. So thank you for that.
That's one for Richard, Christian. That one.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard.
No, happily do that one. It is something that does come up, and often it's cited that tree removal because of subsidence will kind of decimate the population of trees. It really isn't the case. The number of subsidence claims compared to the number of trees is really small. So when you look at some of the London boroughs, I think I was looking at Haringey, and they've got something like 40,000 trees under their control, and I think they said that they had something like 200 subsidence claims, or 200 trees involved in subsidence claims. So if you accept those figures, it really is quite a small proportion of their tree population. And if you look at London boroughs particularly, because they kind of publish information about this, we've been applying the approach of taking out trees where they're causing subsidence, where that's the sensible thing to do. And we've been doing that for a long time, since the kind of 1990s, where there was a move away from underpinning. And tree stocks within London boroughs are generally increasing. They certainly aren't being decimated because of subsidence. but it is a balance, because if you retain a tree and you have to underpin a property, then the kind of environmental damage from the carbon that goes into producing the cement and steel and concrete that you use in underpinning kind of far outweighs any benefit from the carbon that the tree will sequestrate. So it is a difficult one, but no, subsidence will not decimate the tree stocks by any measure, and because it becomes so contentious, local authorities definitely balance that kind of value of the tree against the cost of underpinning, and certainly there will be a duty to consult with members of the public following the Environment Act that was introduced at the end of last year.
Thank you for that, and I think well said with regards to pointing out the environmental impact of actually producing the materials and such like for underpinning. But maybe something there for somebody to pick up on a pledge for every tree removed, there is another tree planted, whether it be by somebody like Innovation Group or insurers. That would be marvellous.
And that's definitely what happens. The difficulty is often that you can't, if you've got a tree causing subsidence, then although you might replacement plant, I mean, essentially you're just storing up another problem. So
no, it'd have to be in a parkland or something like that.
Replacement planting is
just next to the other house.
We do, and we're very keen on, but it's appropriate, and kind of making sure that you aren't I mean,
yes, creating a new.
I like to have subsidence claims, unusual in that regard, but appropriate planting in the right place.
Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you. And then I do have another question. I think this might be for Richard as well, actually. Sorry. What, if anything, can policyholders or indeed insurers do to prevent subsidence?
It's an interesting question, isn't it? So when Stephen was saying that 60% of our claims are caused by trees, it's trees where you've got a clay soil, a clay subsoil, and essentially it's very much like the stuff you used to get from pottery lessons when you were at school and make stuff for your mum. If you dig into the ground, you find clay exactly like that, and that's what's problematic. But that's only kind of in the southeast of, if you imagine a line from the kind of Bristol Channel across to the Wash, if you're south of that, then you may have clay soils, but not everywhere has clay soils. So the idea that all trees and buildings can't live together is a misnomer. It's only if you've got clay soils. And then you just need to be careful. So modern buildings will have deeper foundations than older buildings, but generally, if a tree is not causing subsidence damage, the idea would be to try and maintain that in its current shape, its current size, so it doesn't get large enough to affect the foundations. And so managing and pruning trees is really important. And there's lots of really good advice about how to do that. For insurers, dare I say it, it's probably looking more at risk modelling, to look at tree populations, to look at the zones of influence of those trees, to see whether they want to insure those properties, because you can certainly, by risk modelling, look at getting back to an individual postcode and an individual address. So if you are looking at subsidence and you're concerned about it, you could certainly look at risk modelling to reduce your exposure around that.
Thank you, Richard. Very thorough answer. Thank you. So another question. I'm not sure who this would be for. So this is, are there any areas of the UK which have been hit particularly badly, and has there been an increase in damage occurring to premises which sit in areas which are not usually susceptible to subsidence? Great question.
The areas that get affected are really it's driven by geology, so it's largely the same areas. In some surges we see kind of claims moving up around into the Midlands. We haven't seen that quite so much this time, so it's really been focused on the southeast of England, the usual kind of areas, North London, Essex. It just becomes, we kind of look at them as hotspot areas, so essentially if a claim comes in that area, it's likely to be valid, and we can then triage it in that way. But yeah, it's generally geology. You can't do much about it.
Okay, but nothing that you're particularly seeing in areas that are a surprise.
No, not really. I think we have to go a long way before we start seeing subsidence affecting Scotland and places like that. So generally it kind of follows the same pattern that it usually does, and affects the south of the country much more than the north and the west.
Okay, thank you for that. So we don't have any more questions at the moment, but our delegates, please feel free, just while I'm winding up, just feel free to drop in a question into the chat box should you wish. So really it leaves me to say that we really appreciate your presentation and your panel discussion today. It is very much appreciated, and if there are any questions post-event, we will certainly send them on to you. So for Richard, Liz, Lisa and Stephen, thank you very much for your time. For our delegates, we really appreciate you joining the call today. As I said, if you could please very kindly complete the Survey Monkey that will be sent post-event. The recording of this video will be uploaded to the MGAA YouTube channel and our website, and we won't be sending these slide decks because they are just containing learning objectives, but please do feel free to drop an email to the MGAA should you wish to contact or have an introduction to Innovation Group and any of our panellists today. So once again, thank you all very much for joining us, and I hope you'll have a very pleasant afternoon. Thank you.